do that because I do think this hearing is so important. Now, Mr. Secretary, you told me in response to a question that you would be agreeable to letting TARP die a natural death. You told Senator DeMint that it would die as soon as it can. Now, those two statements may not be the same thing because we all remember when we passed that big bill, I voted against it just for the record, but when we passed that big bill in Congress last year, it's Section 120, subparagraph A, called for the termination of TARP on December 31st, 2009. My background as a physician would say that's a natural death. Subparagraph B allowed for an extension, which then would get into the realm of as soon as I can. Will you tell us today which of those two versions of reality we should expect? There is a bill out. Senator Thune has introduced it on the Senate side. It's on the House side, H.R. 4110, which would repeal Section B, the extension of EESA. Would you be in support of that?
I would not be in support of that bill, but I'm completely supportive of the basic proposition that we need to bring this program to an end as quickly as we can. But I want to underscore one very important thing. If you look back at almost any crisis experienced by a major economy, including the United States in the 30s, Japan in the 90s, it's true in many other cases, the basic, consistent, most costly mistake governments made was to prematurely walk back, unwind, reverse at a time when growth was weak, financial system very damaged. And the reason why that's so important not to do is because if you do that, it's going to be more expensive to solve it. And what my obligation is to try to make sure
not everyone agrees with that philosophy.
Well, I think there's two things it's hard to find people disagree with. One is that if you look at our system today, there is still a lot of damage and a lot of risk of constraints on credit constraining job growth. And I think almost everyone would agree that if you look back at how countries have mismanaged these things in the past, a typical mistake has been to create a premature cliff and end to things before you have growth led by private demand firmly established.
Mr. Secretary, my time is short. No one believes right now that TARP is doing the job that it was set out to do. The money, the oversight, Inspector General Borofsky has 70 people under his employ for a $787 billion bill. I mean, that's a dangerous ratio as far as the oversight, as far as I'm concerned. We're asking people, we're begging people to steal money from TARP. The only way to prevent that, if we're not going to beef up the oversight side, the only way to prevent that is to end the program and incorporate it into some other structure if we must. But this program needs to be ended because the American people see this as a slush fund that is just going to continue.
What would that structure be?
If I can just add one other thing, I would submit to you it's not the fear that there's going to be another hiccup to the economy. It's the fear of what Congress is going to do that is chilling the job market right now. This health care bill scares people to death. An 8% payroll tax that's going to be levied on every small business across the country. That is frightening to people. Our cap and trade bill, which is still in limbo right now, but nevertheless, people look over their shoulder and say, well, what will I do if I'm paying three times or four the amount for gasoline and diesel when I try to run my business in a few years? And people are looking at the financial protection bill and wondering how in the world am I going to be able to have access to capital? How in the world am I going to be able to depend upon any sort of stability in the financial market in the future when you're changing all of the rules constantly? If we would just get out of the way I firmly believe that the resolve of the American people is enough to solve this. I've lived through up and down cycles in my life. I've seen some terrible things happen to the economy back home in Texas when the savings and loans melted down. I don't recall anyone from the Treasury Department or the FDIC coming with a big bag of cash and saying, can I help you through these tough times?
Oh, to the
no,
contrary.
we were required to get through it ourselves.
To the contrary.
We cut spending. My business drew in its resources and kept going through that time. We didn't depend upon the government for help at that time.
Congressman, I don't want to slow your momentum, but I want to try to tell you what I agree with you on because I think it's important. Always good to try to find agreement. You're absolutely right that businesses hate uncertainty, and they face a lot of uncertainty today, not just about the strength of the economy, and not just because of the basic damage done to confidence by the crisis, but they face uncertainty about how these broad reforms moving through Congress are going to come out. And it's one good reason to try to make sure that we bring clarity on what those rules are going to be as quickly as possible. It would not be good to business confidence to stretch and draw these things out. And I also agree.
So you're on record as being opposed to dithering?
Okay. No, I'm in support of Congress deciding and acting and bringing some clarity about what the shape of reforms are going to be. I think if you stretch it out indefinitely, you'll be adding to the problem you're saying. Another thing I agree with you on, this is a very resilient economy, enormously resilient economy, huge amounts of strength and innovation in our economy. And we should all be optimistic and confident that if the government does what it has to do, which is to put out fires, fix crises, make sure that basic public goods governments provide in education infrastructure are done better for the future, this will be a very strong, resilient economy with the gains more broadly shared, like we saw in the 90s. Now, the S&L crisis was incredibly expensive for this country. It cost the taxpayers 2 to 3% of GDP. It was not a crisis solved by the market. It was a crisis where the taxpayer was put on the hook for enormous losses and risks. And we are doing a very good job of limiting the taxpayer's exposure to risk in this. As I said in pointing out to you that we've got $70 billion of taxpayers' money come back since I took office at more than $12 billion in dividends and warrants.
How many people on your staff are involved in oversight of the TARP funds?
God, thank you for bringing up oversight. When Congress passed the TARP, it put in place 3 separate new additional oversight bodies looking over appropriately every judgment we make. The Congressional Oversight Panel, the GAO, and a Special Inspector General.
Now, we've had the Congressional Oversight Panel in here. To be perfectly frank with you, I can't see that they've been doing their job.
Monthly? But they all report monthly. Again, they look over, and this is a great strength of our country, they look over every decision we make. We put every action we make in the public domain so the taxpayer can see it for themselves, and they have a way to judge the basic return for the taxpayer. And that's very important. And these oversight panels, and just one fact that's sort of helpful, the number of people involved in oversight panels exceeds by a significant multiple, significant fraction, the number of people that are involved in the Treasury in implementing the unwinding and dismantling and termination of this program. But that basic oversight is very important. I'm committed to it. We've actually embraced the vast bulk of the suggestions they've made, and I think that's an important thing to do because transparency is very important, and the American people can see, since I took office, what was not possible before. They can look at every contract we've made and look at the details and see what impact that's had on judgments by those institutions.
Mr. Secretary, end TARP by the start of the new year. The American people do want to see that program concluded. I'll yield back. Thank you for consideration.
Thank you very much, Dr. Burgess.